LCSC students of African history, Professor Martin here. And oh my gosh, it's cold down here in my basement. Um, I want to try to keep this particular video short. It's just more of a let's make sure we're all on the same page weekly thing video. So here we are at week 5, and y'all should be in the process of finishing up the Sundiata book and writing your primary source analysis on it. And keep in mind that part of the class is not only learning African historical content, the history of Africa, but it's also being cognizant about the types of sources and how you might use different types of sources to put together histories conceptually, whether that is doing research on some different topic, or for many of y'all as secondary ed teachers, trying to figure out what is it going to take to engage my students, or how do you teach yourself a topic. When you wind up, whether it's a world history class or an American history class or whatever, right? You're at a school, they give you this subject to teach. You may or may not know very much about each of the topics, so you got to know how to go about doing that kind of thing. Anyway, historical content, but also historical sources. So, just as a reminder, right, we've been using the Basil Davidson videos as our secondary source, our interpretation of African history. We use the Traveler's account, Ibn Battuta, getting a look at our primary source from the time from a traveler's account. And now we're working with an oral history. And some of y'all have already brought up some of the pros and cons of the oral history through the Kieta film. So you guys just continue to hang with that, right? I'm not convinced that the griots are as sloppy as some of y'all maybe think, in terms of how do you know that the words of the story haven't been changed and all that kind of stuff. There is an element to that. But do a little recon on the role. And I'm not going to say they're infallible. But the other twist on that is it's interesting to see how people are critical of the oral historians, but not as much the stuff that's written down, right? So it's an interesting twist. It goes back to that whole business about whose knowledge is it takes precedent. And on the oral history stuff, you can find out all kinds of really interesting information. My favorite scene, maybe, in this entire book, there's a couple of my favorite scenes. My favorite scene is when Balafasaki finds that xylophone, right? And then there's just the whole deal that, griots are going to griot. So what'd you expect what this guy was going to do? But the other scene I love is how the court goes out to attempt to find Sundiata's family, and they locate him through the operatives in the market, right? And you get the scene of the market, and you get the scene of this food that's being sold is not from around here, so people who are going to be interested in this particular food, they're from these regions, and now we can start trying to figure out who people are. It's kind of a cool scene in terms of looking at the different groups and how they're connected in the story. And in many ways, that is one of the major points of the book. It's talking about the rise of the Mali Empire, and if you are one of the many ethnic groups in the Mali Empire, it's telling you the story of how that came to be and how you're connected to all these other people and why you're connected to all these other people and why you're allies, all that kind of stuff. So you guys carry on with that. It's kind of a cool thing. Now let's talk about grades for just a minute. I did this in the last video, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much now. Discussion boards. The discussion boards are really the only thing I have. Well, and some of your written stuff. But to really get a grasp of, are you reading or not reading? So if what you put up on the discussion board is absolute minimum length, absolute minimum level of detail, give me something to grade. Give me something to grade. Give me material so I'm thinking to myself, there's no way you didn't read this. Man, look at all these posts. Or look how much detail there is. Or look how awesome this is. And you guys know, I mean, you guys can look at the posts and you can figure out who's, you know, really on top of things and whose posts are short and a little vague. Don't put yourself in that position. All right. We're finishing that up this week. And then we've got a little other business that I want to talk about right now. I have set some of this up in the modules. So next week, week 6, make it so it looks like the way you see it. There we go. Next week, week 6, we're back to Basil Davidson video. If your last name begins, last name begins with A through D, you're on deck for leading the discussion. Look ahead to the next couple of weeks, okay? I promised you a video setting things up, and I've got that up and organized. It is at the bottom of the week 7 stuff, and that's going to apply to week 7, week 8, and week 9. All right, it's like 30 minutes. It explains exactly how I want you guys to go about doing that stuff. All right, so one of the reasons that we're only doing a Basil Davidson video week 6 is to recuperate a little bit from the Sundiata stuff, but also to gather some energy to get into this stuff. All right, so take a look at that. Do not let that slip your mind, particularly with the way I have some of it scheduled out. All right, next, maybe I'll just do this through the syllabus. Okay, here we are, Sundiata week 5, Basil Davidson week 6. Week 7, we're dealing with 2 chapters of the Atlantic slave trade stuff. Week 8, 2 chapters of the Atlantic slave trade stuff. Week 9, 2 chapters of the Atlantic slave trade stuff. That stuff is all set up for you. All right, make sure you're reading it. Make sure you're taking good notes. Make sure you have an idea about how to use those notes on your final project. It's a whole other set of sources to combine with this stuff when you write your final papers, right? Because I'm essentially giving you the documents for you to write your final papers with. It's a research paper, but it's really a research paper based on all the stuff we've read. Connect the dots. Week 10, we're back to Basil Davidson for a week, and then we're going to spring break it. I don't have week 10 laid out yet. I will very shortly. And then after spring break, I think this is the way it's going to work. We've got the book African Perspectives on Colonialism. That's going to take a couple of weeks. The Basil Davidson book. A book, Nervous Conditions, that you should make sure you have and read it over spring break. Okay? I realize that this is kind of out of order here, but Nervous Conditions is a novel. It's a story. You can get into it while you're doing whatever it is you do on spring break, whether that's just going to work or whatever. And then we're just going to have a discussion about it the last week of class. It's a fun book. Well, it's not a fun book. It's a good book, though. And then that'll be our final type of source, some fiction. You know, how to use historical fiction. All right. I talked about a lot of this in a couple of previous videos, so I don't feel compelled to do a whole lot of it right now. But I wanted to reconnect with you here week 5 as you're going through the Sundiata stuff, and just let you know that I have the next 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks of the class set up. It's ready to go. The 5th week from now will be set up pretty soon. It's pretty straightforward. That'll get us to spring break. At some point between now and then, I'll get the rest of it set up. We're like a third of the way through it, right? Okay. So, if I don't hear from you, I assume everything's going great, everything's going well. If that's not the case, then send me an email. Let's make sure we meet on campus. Let's make sure we meet through Zoom. Let's make sure that we talk a little bit. Your discussion posts, your primary source analyses, your outlines of, learning through discussion, all those look pretty good, right? Details. It's about details. All right. You guys get it. Okay. Let me know if you need anything, and enjoy your historical studies.